Hello, my name is Father Bartholomew Hutcherson. I go by Father Bart. I'd first like to say hello to Kaitlin Huerta, Miss Huerta, who I have known since she was a freshman in college and very involved in the campus ministry program at the University of Arizona, where I was campus chaplain for 10 years. And during that time, Miss Huerta and I worked together in campus ministry. She was involved in campus ministry leadership, and I was very blessed to get to know her. And I'm very proud of her and the work that she's doing, teaching the faith to you and to others as a high school teacher. And very blessed to have known her as a student and look forward to seeing all the wonderful things that she does as a teacher as well. I'm making this video in the town of Dutch Harbor, the village of Dutch Harbor, 800 miles out into the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. I'm here temporarily. I just came up here to work for a month and to serve this small community at Easter. They don't have a full-time priest, and so priests come in here for short times to serve the community. They have a deacon who works here who celebrates liturgy with them weekly and gives a communion service, but sometimes a priest comes in, and I'm blessed to be here for the end of Lent and the Easter season to serve the small community. I've been living in Anchorage, Alaska since December. Much of my ministry as an itinerant or traveling preacher was shut down because of COVID. And so I was blessed to be able to come up here and live with the Dominican community in Anchorage, Alaska, to help serve the people they serve here, and to go out to some of these smaller communities to serve as well. It's a great blessing. I'll say more about Dominican life in a few minutes. You can see that I'm dressed in the habit of the Dominican order. Typically, I don't wear a black suit and a white collar the way secular priests do. And that distinguishes me as a member of a religious order. This is my religious habit. And my religious habit says to others that I belong to this particular order, the order of preachers. So I am a priest, but I'm not just a priest. I'm a priest who is a member of the Dominican order. So I know you've already had priests talk to you about the call to priesthood, and I'll speak a little bit about that, but I really want to talk to you about what it means to be a religious order priest. So I'm a member of the Dominican order. The Dominicans, officially, our name is the Order of Preachers. We're called Dominicans because we were founded by St. Dominic in the 13th century. The official date of our foundation is 1216. What distinguishes a religious order priest from a diocesan priest, or what's called a secular priest, is our particular specialty of ministry. I often make an analogy to the medical field. In the medical field, you've got general practitioners like family doctors or internists who kind of look at the whole body, look at the whole, all systems and how they all work together, and treat the whole person. And then there are specialists like an orthopedist who works on bone and skeletal structures, or a cardiologist who works on the heart, or a pediatrician who works with children, a podiatrist who works on feet, and so forth. And that's basically the distinction between a diocesan priest and a religious order priest. People who are in religious orders are specialists. We have particular focus of our ministry. The particular focus of the Dominican ministry is that of preaching. We call that a charism from the Greek word, which means gift. And so the gift that the Dominican offers to the church is the gift of preaching. There are some other religious orders which specialize in work with the poor, or medical work, or missionary work, or teaching work. They have particular specialties in other areas. The primary work of the Dominican, given to us by St. Dominic when we were founded 800 years ago, is the work of preaching. So we are preaching friars. That's a distinction that needs to be made as well. I'm not a monk, even though I'm dressed in the habit of the Dominican order, which some people would say, oh, he's a monk. Well, monks are members of particular religious orders who belong to monasteries and stay in those monasteries doing the work of the monastery and the prayer life of the monastery. In the 13th century, a new kind of religious order was established by people like St. Dominic and St. Francis, who wanted to have an order of men and women who would profess the vows of religious life, poverty, chastity, obedience. I'll say more about that in a few minutes. And live the life of a religious priest, but work in the world. And so the distinction is that those who stay in one place and live in one monastery through the entirety of their ministry or their life are monks. And those of us that profess the same vows as monks, but work in the world, we're active in the world, we are friars. And so I'm a Dominican friar. And again, that's a distinction that's very important to make. Very often, if I'm out in public in my habit, somebody will say, "Oh, are you a monk?" And sometimes I'll just say yes because I don't want to engage any further. But there is a distinction between a monk and a friar, and I am a friar. The word friar simply is from the Latin word which means brother. And that's another important point. There are people who are in my order who will not be ordained to the priesthood. We call them cooperator brothers. They cooperate in the ministry of the order, and they're not ordained to the priesthood, but they profess the same vows that I profess and live in the same communities that I live in. And they simply commit themselves to religious life, but not to the work of being a priest. So they don't celebrate Mass, they don't anoint people, they don't witness marriages and so forth. But their life is very similar to mine. The thing that distinguishes me from a secular priest, and I'll say more about that in a few minutes. There are also religious sisters who are not priests, but who profess religious vows and who work in the work of their religious orders and live the life of a religious. In the Dominican order, we have friars who are priests and cooperative brothers. We have Dominican nuns who live in monasteries and live a life of prayer. And then we have active sisters that work in the world the way that we as friars work in the world. And then there are also lay Dominicans who are men and women who are married and have families, but like to live according to Dominican spirituality. And that's the thing that really distinguishes us in our lives, is the fact that we have a particular spirituality. It's not just the work, but we have a spirituality. And again, I'll say more about that as I go on in the video. But first, let's talk about the distinction between a religious priest and a secular priest. So, again, I belong to a religious order, and as a member of a religious order, I professed the theological councils. And the theological councils are usually called vows, and the three theological councils are poverty, chastity, and obedience. We live these vows in imitation of Jesus, who lived those three theological councils and taught us to live them in imitation of him. And so poverty means that I own no property. I drive a car. I refer to that car as my car because I have exclusive use of it for the purposes of ministry, but it does not belong to me. It belongs to the order. My vow of poverty also means that if I were to inherit money from my family, that money would become the money of the order. If whatever money I bring into the order through my ministry does not come to me, it goes to support the work of my community and of my order. Poverty is a way of living more simply, so that I don't get attached to physical things, I don't get attached to material things, and I continue by not being attached to those material things, I'm able to focus more on the things, the spiritual things, and on my work as a religious and a priest. Chastity, of course, means that I use my sexuality the way God intended for me to use my sexuality, and as an unmarried man, because I also have to profess celibacy. As an unmarried man, that means that I don't enter into a sexual relationship with anybody. And in one sense, we understand this as part of our life of service to other people. I don't have the commitment of family. I don't have the commitment to a wife, and that makes it possible for me to focus myself, my intentions, my life on the service of God's people. And it's different for us who profess chastity as opposed to professing celibacy, promising celibacy, which secular priests do. The promise of celibacy is a commitment that's made not to marry for the sake of the kingdom of God. In addition to that, we profess chastity, and chastity means that we're going to focus that energy on our community life, on our brothers, the brothers in our life. We're not going to have a family. If the church were to make a change tomorrow, and the church could, allowing priests to get married, religious priests would not marry, because that's always been a distinction. Monks, priests, and religious orders did not marry, and some secular clergy did. And so if that were to change again in the history of the church, because of the vow of chastity, we as religious would not make that change the way secular priests would. The third theological counsel, of course, is obedience. Many people will tell you that's the hardest to follow. Obedience means that I don't have the same kind of self-determination that many people do in terms of where I live and the kind of work that I do. I commit obedience to a religious superior. And the primary effect of that is he tells me where to work. He tells me which kind of ministry I'm going to be in. One of the things that attracted me to the Dominican order in the Western United States was our work in campus ministry. And I entered the order, having been a youth minister before I was a religious. I entered the order with the idea that I wanted to work in campus ministry. I wanted to work with young people. But I never had a promise of that, and as I went through my formation, I committed myself to this idea of obedience so that I didn't have the bigger picture of what was needed in the church at that moment. And so I left it up to my religious superior to decide what the needs of the church were in that moment, how to best use my gifts, and where I would work. Fortunately for me, the first 17 years of my priesthood, I did work in university ministry and loved it greatly. But ultimately, my vow of obedience to the master of the order, to my local superior, means that I work where they ask me to work. It also means that I'm obedient to God, I'm obedient to the Gospels, I'm obedient to the laws of the order, and I'm obedient to the Pope. I'm obedient to all lawful authority who have some command over my life. The secular priest vows or promises obedience to the local ordinary, which means to his bishop. I have to be given permission of a bishop to work in a particular diocese, so there's a cooperation between my superiors and the bishop of the diocese where I work. But ultimately, the bishop can't reassign me. He could kick me out of his diocese. But it's up to my superior to decide whether I work in this diocese or that diocese, this ministry, that ministry. And that's the effect of obedience. So again, poverty, chastity, obedience are the three theological counsels, the promises or vows that we make before God for the work of our lives. So that's all religious. Monks, friars of other orders, sisters, we all make those same theological counsels or those same religious vows. So what distinguishes a Dominican from other religious, say from the Jesuits or from the Franciscans or from the Christian Brothers or from other religious orders? What distinguishes Dominicans? And this ultimately is what I'll talk about when I speak about my own call to priesthood and my own call to religious life. Well, we say there are 4 distinguishing characteristics of Dominican spirituality. The first usually talked about is community. We always live in community. We are not called to minister individually. We're called to submit ourselves to the work of a particular community. And in that community, we're called to live a life of fraternity and the charism or the theological virtue of charity with each other. And so I don't simply go off and do things on my own. I'm assigned to a religious community. I'm accountable to that religious community in the same way that a married man is accountable to his wife and family. I'm accountable for my work. I'm accountable for my time. I'm accountable for things like how I spend money or how I use my car or various aspects of regular life. I'm accountable to a community, and within that community, I have a religious superior. And my community is St. Albert's Priory in Oakland, California. It's a very large community. I live with 45 other friars, men who are in preparation for priesthood, men who are their teachers, some retired men. And my life is enriched by the fact that I gather with those men for prayer and meals, and that I minister with some of those men. And our life together is enriched by the fact that we call each other brother, we consider each other brothers, and we treat each other with remarkable respect, fraternity, and charity. And so community life is very, very important to the life of the Dominican. We see our charism of preaching growing out of our life together. Our bringing the Word of God to the world is enhanced by the fact that we share that Word with each other in the context of a community. Of course, also, the second pillar of Dominican spirituality is prayer. And we as a religious community gather several times a day to pray what we call divine office. This is the praying of the Psalms, where we gather in community for prayer. Our primary prayer in community is the Eucharist, so we gather for a community Mass. In many of our places, the community Mass is also open to the public. Of course, during the last year, we did not have the public coming to our Masses, but one of the great joys of the fact that I live in a religious community that's basically a closed community was that during the last year, we never stopped our prayer life together. We still gathered in our chapel, the 45 of us or so, gathered in our chapel for prayer several times a day and gathered for the Mass each day. And it was part of our commitment to keep each other safe. We didn't have the public in attendance at our Masses, but we were able to maintain that very important part of our life as Dominicans. The third pillar of Dominican life is that of study. Every Dominican considers himself a student. We have a particular academic tradition, the academic tradition of scholasticism, typified by the teachings of St. Albert the Great and St. Thomas Aquinas. And we root our studies in that 13th century theologian, St. Thomas. But of course, we also study modern theology as well, and we make our life of study is at the service of our preaching. So we don't just study for the sake of study, although sometimes it feels that way. We study for the sake of being better preachers so that we can bring the truth to each other. We understand that God created us with these great minds that he gave us, and he wants us to use those minds in search for truth, in search for what is. And so we orient our study towards a deeper understanding of truth, a deeper understanding of that truth, especially as it's expressed in its perfection in God, so that we can now bring that in a rational way, in a logical way, in our preaching to other people. And again, the study is important. Every Dominican always considers himself a student, whether he's in a formal study program or not. He's always studying for the sake of his ministry of preaching. And finally, that's the fourth pillar of our spirituality, that of ministry, and specifically the ministry of preaching. We broaden it out, and we talk about Dominican sisters, and we talk about various ministries in which people engage. We broaden that out to talk about different ministries or different apostolates or different kinds of service in the church. But the original idea is that our primary ministry is that of preaching, and so that pillar that forms our spirituality is preaching. So community, prayer, and study are all at the service of that particular charism, that particular ministry of preaching. In my own life as a priest, as a religious, again, I think I said earlier that I was a lay youth minister. I was a layman working in the church prior to 1990. After college, I had a regular job in the world. I worked in quality control management at a textiles company. But I'd started as a volunteer working in youth ministry and eventually made my way to doing that work professionally. I moved to California in the mid-'80s to be the youth minister at a parish in San Mateo, California. And the longer I worked as a youth minister, the longer I worked in ministry as a layman, the more I began to realize that I wanted to go deeper with that. And that desire to go deeper with my ministry is what I began to identify as possibly a call to priesthood. I had an excellent spiritual director before I entered the order. He was a seminary professor at that time. His name was Father Richard Garcia. He eventually became Bishop Richard Garcia of Monterrey. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago. God rest his soul. But he was a diocesan priest from San Jose. And he really helped me to discern what was going on in my life at that moment and what I was experiencing as a desire for a deeper ministry and how I could understand that as a call. And I began to think that the greater desire was to minister sacramentally in the church, to be able to celebrate Mass, to hear confessions, to celebrate weddings, to enter into the life of the people that I served in a deeper way through the sacraments. And so first I began to identify what I thought was a priestly vocation. The longer I met with Father Garcia and talked with him about my life and that call, and we began to explore deeper issues in terms of my own personality in life, I began to also think about religious life. And what began that discussion was the whole idea of living alone versus living in community. Almost all of the diocesan priests that I knew at that time in my life lived singly in parishes. A few of them lived with another priest, but their life was very much a single life by themselves, and it seemed to me to be a very solitary life and maybe even a very lonely life. I have a very outgoing personality, and I realized that was not going to work for me, that would not be good for me personally to live that kind of life on my own. And so I began to think about the idea of community life and what it would mean. And you've got to understand that a lot of people who enter into community life, into religious life, are very introverted people who like the idea of withdrawing from the world for the sake of the interior life for studying. And so while I was thinking about religious life from the standpoint of living with other people, my kind of extroverted personality is not always the most compatible with religious life. I had to find a balance at some point in my life, in my formation, between my extroversion and my need to go interior. And that's one of the things that religious life provided for me. It helped me temper my outgoing personality. God uses that. It's part of who I am, my extroversion. But it helped me temper that to go inside and find that place of prayer that's internal. And over the course of my 30 years in Dominican life, I think that my personality hasn't changed at all, but my ability to be both an extrovert and to find that interior life has been enhanced by my religious life. So back when I was discerning, it was first the call. It was that idea of living in community, and so I began to look at religious orders that had community as one of their foundational principles and one of the principles that they continue to live. Many religious orders have communities, but individual priests go and live individually on their own. That didn't appeal to me. I was looking for an order that continued to uphold community as a value and a way of life. And so the Dominicans certainly fit that bill for me. There were several others that did as well, but ultimately I would settle on the Dominicans. There was also the work of preaching. I mentioned that I'm an extrovert, and I've always enjoyed sharing the gospel with other people. And so the idea of entering into an order whose primary work was that sharing of the gospel appealed to me. And the pillar of study also really appealed to me. The desire to study, the desire to learn more, the pursuit of truth has always been part of who I am as a person. And so, regardless of which religious order I entered, prayer would certainly be a part of what I was committing to. But the three other pillars, community, and preaching and study, really attracted me to the Dominican order. And ultimately, over the course of a long period of time, visiting with the Dominicans, visiting with other religious orders, I found what was compatible. And I began to see that compatibility as a call not only to priesthood, but also a call to religious life. And so far, I've been a Dominican for 30 years. I've been a priest for nearly 24 years. And during those times, God has continued to bless my commitment to serve as a priest, to serve and to live the life the life of a religious, the life of a Dominican. My own life is enriched by my participation in the Dominican order, my commitment to the Dominican order. But also, I hope that the life of those I serve, the students that I served in university ministry, the people that I preach to now in my ministry as an itinerant preacher, the people that I've served in parishes that I've worked in. I hope that my life as a Dominican continues to offer some sense of growth, some sense of access to God, some sense of becoming more holy, growing in holy, which ultimately is what it's about. Not just for me to grow in holiness, but also to provide opportunities for you to grow in holiness as well. I wish that I were with you and could answer some questions. If you had questions, certainly if you have particular questions, give them to Ms. Huerta and she can email me or send me directly the questions, and I'd be happy to answer them in the future. I hope that this has been informative for you. Other religious orders have different charisms, have different particular ministries. And their lives are slightly different. So I hope I've given you some perspective on what it means to be a Dominican. God bless you as you continue to study. You study religious life and religious priests and various vocations in the church. Understand that a vocation, all of you have a vocation. God is calling you somewhere. God is calling you to do and be something. And it's up to you, with the help of wise people, to discern what that call is, and to understand that God is calling you to grow in holiness in the context of that life. I'm standing in front of this image of St. Christopher. St. Christopher, what the legend of St. Christopher is that he bore Jesus on his shoulder across a river in his travels as a child. And I don't know the full story, but because of that, he is Christopher literally means Christ bearer, and all of us are called to be Christ bearers in the world. So regardless of how you understand your own vocation, how you understand your own call in life, I hope that you'll commit to bring Christ to others, to bear him in your hearts, to bear him in your lives in such a way that others can encounter Christ in you. God bless you.